Now, this was all to hide the true lineage or genetics of humanity by pulling the woman from Adam's rib. They had to create a womb on Adam to change the succession. So the book of Genesis starts the genetics of the royal families that rule over us. Prior to these royal families, we didn't have national flags. We had family crests, and you had inheritance to the land, just like animals do, based upon you being a natural human being born from the womb of your mother. You're part of a bloodline. So we traded that inheritance with the beginning that the Genesis story gives us. And it gave us a new genetic story. And that day one that the Bible talks about is really day one of the Gregorian calendar. And that was 2018 years ago from today. We know that the earth is older than 2,000 years. Well, that's because if you start from day one and start going backwards, you will start counting up again, and you would be in BC era, which has nothing to do with Jesus Christ. And we're going to talk about that. This is before the coming era. You got to understand that not everyone's Christians. So the BC don't means before Christ for everyone. Okay. And AD means Anno Domini, meaning year of our Lord, which was Norma, which was the first ruler when the Dynasties set up shop and took us from Predynastic time. And that was the beginning of dynastic time that we're under today. So the first ruler in dynastic time was Norma, and there was two different rulers. We're going to talk about that. This is still an overview. We got to have this overview before we go in detail. We need to know the difference between predynastic versus dynastic, or prehistory versus history. We need to understand how to navigate the timeline. History begins 3100 BC. The year 3100 BC, when we count up, we're going down on the year. So as we move up, we go to 2600 BC, 1786 BC, around the Middle Kingdom time, 1085 BC, around the New Kingdom. You go all the way down to 50 BC when the Greeks ruled, and you count down from 50 to day one, and that begins AD, which is where we at now. AD means Anno Domini, or the year of our Lord. So this AD is not AD for after death, meaning Christ. It means the year of our Lord. We're still in the year of Norma. His succession is carried on through the Pope. And there were two rulers, so you also have a Dalai Lama. So AD is Anno Domini, not after death. Norma is still dominating over us, even though he was mythified as Christ and many more other saviors today. He's really the founder of this new world order. And remember that the word domini means dominate. So again, we are in dynastic time where we are now being dominated by royal families or kings. So we are still within the kingdom of Norma. So we are being dominated by kings that rose to power after the gender wars, in which we'll get into later. So we're talking about a collaboration of wealthy families that have representatives for their networks. And that's how you get your Pope or your Dalai Lama. The first Pope and Dalai Lama were the first two kings of Upper and Lower Egypt. And this New World Order started 7,000 years ago with that unification in 3100 BC. So again, AD means Anno Domini, and we just explained what that means. It only means the death of Christ if you're referring to a Christian timeline, because the Bible has its historical account. So if you're referring to that account and you're a biblical believer, then Jesus would split your timeline. But if you're in another culture, it'll be another deity that split your timeline. But everyone is basically still being sold this Darwinian evolution timeline by their government, who's governing their mental. And this trick has been played on us for the past 7,000 years. The death has nothing to do with the death of Christ. It has something to do with the death of the matriarchy. The oldest predynastic spirituality that we find was the worship of the womb that we all come from, or the uterus, and that was turned into Jesus on the cross with the two thieves. But prior to that, it was Adam and Eve with the tree of life in the middle. But that tree of life was cursed because the serpent that was wrapped around it was seen as evil in our time, when really that serpent goes back to the pre-dynastic Christian origins. When Christians weren't Christians, they were worshippers of the Minoan serpent goddess, and everyone had a version of this serpent goddess. We'll be talking about that. Christianity starts with Adam in Genesis. Prior to that, what we call Christians were called Minoans, and they worshiped the serpent goddess just like everyone else in the ancient world. And that serpent goddess is a personification of the female uterus. As I stated earlier, this is the oldest spirituality on earth. She predates Jesus because everyone had a great mother before these patriarchal deities. But you can see Jesus is a patriarchal representation of the female uterus. And for the first time on earth, when the patriarchs was in power, the female reproductive organ was now personified by a male. Again, this is why they had to create Adam a womb, and he had to produce children and women out of him. But if you look at this serpent goddess, you can see she indeed became Jesus Christ, or the cross, because the uterus is the crossroads by which we enter and exit the earth. It's what's called a great portal of life. And again, throughout this series, we'll be showing you how we transition from this matriarchal time to today's current patriarchal societies.